This is the GMologist, GM extraordinaire, the GMologist.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Geomologist Presents. As the title shows, today I have my buddy Darkfluid, and he's going to teach me to play Rolemaster. So this is all, I guess, inspired by Barry of Shadow of the GM. You might know from the Audio Dungeon Discord. He's going to run a play-by-post. I've never played Rolemaster before. I thought I was very excited. I'm very excited. I'm still excited to play it, although its set has waxed and waned, mainly because I have no idea how it works. And uh, Dark Fluid has kindly come on before to try to explain to me, at least to set up all my stats, of which there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or 11. I don't know if I count that right. 3, 6. There's 10 stats. Not as much as Harnmaster, but there's still a lot. And then now I'm in the development point phase, and maybe I put the stats where they're supposed to go, but I have no idea how to play. So I have no idea if my character is going to die in the first pass, and then I'll just get really frustrated and never play the game again, probably. But maybe that won't happen because Darkfluid's going to explain to me how this all works. So finally, I will introduce him. Darkfluid, how are you doing today?
Good, good. I'm hope I don't feel too much pressure here, describe teaching you how to play in one go. I mean, I'll try to give you enough detail to have an understanding, but we're not going to go, into hopefully too much detail that everyone falls asleep or that we get too deep for that initial learning phase. But we'll
Right.
try to give a good comprehensive overview of the system.
Well, great. Yeah. And speaking of podcasts about Rolemaster, definitely check out Jason Connerly and Barry got together and did sort of a Rolemaster episode maybe about 3 weeks ago. I'll put the link in the show notes for this. But they really kind of gave a high-end overview, and they're talking with two players who have played Rolemaster a lot. And here I've never played, and I still don't understand character creation really. Um, and hopefully I'll be able to finish it and play the play by post because it sounds really cool. So, all right. Well, so say we're at a convention. I signed up for Rolemaster because I never wanted to play. I get there a little early. I'm like, okay, I've never played this game. What's it all about? What do I do? But maybe also give yourself a history of why you played a lot of it. Why I know you said earlier you haven't run it, but you've run games that are adjacent to it. So maybe give a little history of the game, like why I should be excited to play it, well, history of your participation, and then what I need to know. And I'm sure I'll
Okay.
interject with questions as we go.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, like I said, like you have warned everyone, I haven't ran a Roll Master campaign, but I've played in several, including some long, high level, complicated campaigns that were very character driven, theater of the mind campaigns. You can run it though very tactically, much like AD&D, some of the older games. You can pull out a grid, run it tactically. You can also run theater of the mind. It really gives you a lot of options. And very high level characters and epic fantasy have a lot of options
Mhm.
that you can go with. And I would say that because of that, if you've ran in a lot of high level campaigns, you have a lot of time to get into your character, you can really immerse yourself in the system. I ran mostly MERP when I GM, which is a lighter version of the system.
Mhm.
Um, I'm sure if anyone's listening and they're a Roll Master, or specifically a Roll Master 2 GM, and they hear me misstate or leave something out, I apologize. Feel free to call in and tell us the big piece that we've missed
Yeah,
for everyone's benefit.
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah. Call in with comments too. That would be great. And maybe you can give if Dark Fluid misses something or I ask a dumb question, you guys can comment about that or give the answer, I guess.
yeah, yeah. As a pitch, I would say if I was telling you about it, I would ask if you'd played something like AD&D, Hyperborea, Pathfinder. Not a rules light game, not a minimalist game.
Okay.
but not. It's a game like any of those where you optionally you can include and leave out a lot of things. There's a lot of splat books to it that you
Mhm.
can use. But the core game itself, I would think it's a medium complexity game, although a lot of people feel that it's very complex. It's a game where you definitely have to add
Mhm.
mathematical bonuses, add, subtract from your rolls based on situations. But like many of those older games, you don't have to use every modifier. And you will internalize most of the modifiers after playing pretty quickly. Most people, have played AD&D for a while can spout off all of the combat modifiers that are commonly used off the top of their head. And it's the same
Mhm.
thing with Rollmaster. It's a percentage die game, roll high, um, and it is heavy on the character development. So very heavy character development, very customizable, with, again, heavy interactions during the periods where you level up.
Mhm.
But once that's all put in place for this type of game, again, not a rules light game, it runs very smooth and quickly at the table because there are fewer rolls. Uses tables for
Mhm.
everything,
Mhm.
which it's kind of infamous for. But the thing is, the tables are what makes it run so quickly and what simplifies the rolls once you're in the game and playing. Normally, we'd hand out tables to everyone for their appropriate characters so they could reference them themselves. A lot of good DMs very quickly reference the tables, and some of you memorize some of the common tables.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, for like movement and maneuver and some things. The game had a lot of innovations, I think, at the time. It does a lot of neat things with criticals and character development customization, and uses partial success tables for a lot of skill rolls,
Mhm.
which I didn't at the time, way back in the days. Early 90s, late 80s, know of anything else that did that. Of course, there probably were some.
Partial success.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe people did that for Call of Cthulhu, but I don't think they had the concept of. I think it was just pass fail. I don't think they had the concept of a crit or they had a the concept of a crit, or if they had like now that they have in seventh edition hard success or extreme success. Although I guess Hardmaster did have crits in a percentile dice system,
Mm.
right? So if you got double, I think if you got doubles or divisible by five, it was a crit or something like that. So I guess that's sort of not quite partial success, but it's sort of a graded success
Mm.
in
Yeah.
that crit um, supersedes regular, supersedes fail, supersedes critical fail. So some sort of gradation like that.
Yeah. The game is pretty simulationist, lots of mechanics if you want. The more you use the extra companion books,
Hmm.
and I'm talking I'll specifically talk about Rollmaster 2.
Okay.
That's what I'm familiar with. There's a ton of companion books, which adds a ton of new spell lists and skills and options. And so when you're doing these really involved campaigns with high level characters where you want to get into that very detailed character development, maybe more akin to, I've never played it, but something that people tend to tell me is more akin to something like Pathfinder.
Hmm. Okay.
You have a lot of options as a GM that you can pull out and as a player where, if you want to do something mechanically, you can do it. There's the spell lists are very detailed, and so you can do a lot of magical item creation with a lot of very specific effects. And there's probably a spell or a rule for actually doing that, which is kind of nice if you like to have the support of that and not have to make it up or do some hand waving.
Okay.
Some people might hard bounce off of that, and so that's why I right up front would tell them that's the pitch is that the mechanics will dictate a lot of things.
Okay. All right. So how do we get started? Or
I'll
I guess so percentile dice, that's a basic premise.
Yeah, and
Um,
I'll explain. There's a couple different types of rolls that you can make. Three or four main roll types. There are unmodified rolls where you'll make your roll and take it unmodified, the results unmodified.
okay.
There are your modified rolls where again, you're trying to roll high and you add your bonuses and negatives and take the total roll, even goes
Okay.
above 100, or there are open-ended rolls, and those can be purely open-ended, low and high, where it can go down or up above 100, or they'll be restricted to open-ended high only, for example. And when you do that, if you roll, typically it's rolling 1 through 5, you roll again and subtract the next roll from it.
Mhm.
96 to 100, you roll again and add.
So that would be like in a skill or in a combat, or I mean, I guess they're all skills, but that'd be
Yeah, as we
combat and non-combat.
Yeah, as we go through the roles, I'll kind of tell everyone, is this an open-ended role or is it not? And when it comes to some of these combat and spell rolls, they're actually both rolls simultaneously. So you roll, and if you get an unmodified result, for example, um, of 96 to 100 on an
Mhm.
attack roll, before you add any bonuses, that gives you a very special result.
Okay. Like
That gives you a very, yeah,
unmodified.
Yeah, that gives you a very high damage result, unmodified. If it doesn't fall into that unmodified range, that fail or special critical result range, then you add all your modifiers in and you take that result. So the roll can be simultaneously evaluated for its unmodified result, and then if it doesn't meet those criteria, go ahead and add all your modifiers, and that's your final roll. Now look against the chart.
All right. So you don't just like, well, so say like I have a 94 in CO, whatever that is. I don't just roll below that.
Um, No, it's not roll below. And an interesting thing is you don't actually use the skills themselves or the stat themselves. You use the bonus that comes from it. So in regards to a stat, you would never use the stat. You would use your modifier and your total modifier. And then for a skill, you have skill ranks. And for every rank you get in a skill, and we'll go into this in a second, it will give you bonuses.
Right. So then you roll the percentile dice and then add those to your skill
Correct.
roll.
And
Okay.
subtract any modifiers as necessary,
Okay.
that sort of thing.
So let's say one rank equals 5. And then I was going to say, but I think you kind of put a pause on that for me.
Yeah, well, it's each skill rank has a different amount, and we'll get back to that when we go into skills.
Okay.
But that's the basic of rolling. You're rolling, and if it's a modified roll, you're typically adding bonuses, and that includes your skill ranks and your stat bonuses.
Okay.
Um,
And then it's like you look on a table for these.
yeah,
Uh,
all your results you look on a table for
no, for
everything.
even like what your stat bonus gives and then what your skill rank gives. You look that
Correct.
up. Okay.
Yeah, there's a table to show you on that. Now, you don't have to look at that table.
Mhm.
With your stats and your skills, as you go through that characters, your bonuses will be on your character sheet and be totaled up so that you don't have to
Okay.
look. Your results will be what's on a table, right? But
Yeah. Gotcha.
um,
So
the
and the higher the better. That's what you
the
said.
higher the better. The higher the better. There's only really one exception to that, and we'll get into that
Okay.
case when we go into partial success.
Okay.
Um, Hits, you're equivalent to say hit points in D&D or the like,
Okay.
um, are similar to what you think of as hit points, um, and they work similar to what you would see in a lot of house rules or various D&D variants. At 0 hit points, you pass out. At 0 hits, you pass out.
Mhm.
Um, at 0 plus your con score,
Mhm.
which is like Constitution in D&D and various games. Once you go below that, you actually start to die. Um, and I think it's con divided by 10 rounds. Once
Okay.
you go below that, you're dead. Um, but death itself is kind of a process. And you can die in other ways in this game.
Yeah, there's the infamous crit tables, I think, right?
Yeah, and in fact, one of the complaints is I've heard some people levy is at very high levels, you have so many hit points and things going on that most people and creatures die from the criticals, not from the actual hits.
Yeah,
Which
but I mean, it kind of makes sense in the fiction, right? I mean, Smaug died from a critical hit,
Yeah, and I
for
think it
example.
makes combat, to me, I like that. It makes combat, especially at the high levels, more epic.
Sure.
You don't just I hacked at it until it died. And the other thing is combat can be very fast and brutal in this game and very tactical because
Hmm.
of all the bonuses involved and positioning and things like that. And
Okay.
because the critical tables and are in place in some of those things, uh, it's kind of like MERP. It's infamous for people complaining they die very early on. But if you understand the game and you have some people to help you, you can avoid some of that and you play smart. It's in some cases people will play it as a game where similar to some of the other simulationist games, it's not always the smartest thing for you to do to get into combat. You should be like an OSR game. You should put yourself in a situation to win the combat before the dice get rolled, whether that
Yeah.
be avoid the combat or whether you have the tactical advantage. Um, because when we get to the combat phase, I can talk about how some of that works and how you can use that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great point. I think yeah, I like a game that, you know, well, two things, right? So when you say I'm going to do X as you declare what you're going to do for combat, or even during the phase of combat, if you don't declare, but when it comes your turn, you say, well, I would like to do this and this and that becomes a meaningful decision that is reflected in the mechanic. I enjoy that. And I know there's been complaints about games where there's really no meaningful decision. You just kind of roll and, it's like a back and forward bash. And it's up to the GM really to describe the action, right? So, so that's good.
Yeah,
So it's all, and it is true. I agree with most games, especially games where you realize, right? Let's say like even like a more modern game where you say you have five health, and most weapons will do five health of damage. So one shot you're done. So you're going to be more tactical and savvy about your fighting. You're not just going to charge or even or does I guess so. It's always like a feeling. So I would say you probably people have that in like a low level D&D game, right? Where they're going to be a little more cautious, but then get to I mean, in the newer game, get to like third level, but in the older games, maybe you get to like fifth when you start chucking fireballs, I guess. And then you're not as you just zerg everything. But
characters are not as um, death proof, or they're somewhat fragile in this game and
yeah,
in the
yeah,
early
you
stages.
never.
And you'll see it takes time to heal.
That's
Healing
good.
is not
That's good. That's good.
instant. Um, so yeah, that's critical wounds are a common way to die.
Hmm.
There's also the kind of concept of soul destruction. It's usually
Hmm.
done by magic or some sort of magical effect where you didn't take any hit points of damage. You were just it's sort of its own critical where it's you're dead.
Yeah, yeah.
The body is there, but there's nothing behind it. Um,
Hmm.
and then death really occurs in two different ways outside of or there's a process to death where you lose stat points
Yeah.
as you're dying.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and that can be prevented um, a couple different ways via magic or by returning them via first aid or herbs or magic their hits back up above that level where you are dying,
Hmm.
that 0 plus con. Um, and stat loss can be permanent without some magical restoration, if you've been left to die for too long. The other thing is the soul leaving the body, which is kind of, you have that, it's kind of the equivalent of that soul destruction, which can also be restored via magic or at least held off, staved off via magic.
Hmm.
And as we get into race, you'll see that each race has a different time period. It's one of the advantages and disadvantages of each race is how long before uh their soul leaves the body and that sort of thing.
Oh,
So
interesting. That's kind of interesting.
um and
Yeah,
then
and I guess that goes. I don't know. It seems like there's seemingly a consistency of making meaningful decisions even during character creation, right?
yeah, there's a lot to balance during that, but the I think people will get too caught up sometimes the first couple times they play the game and trying to just really consider every single thing. And
Hmm.
in the end, a lot of these things don't come up. I mean, that's where a good GM or a good player can help you to just keep you from making the obvious mistake of doing something that's not going to be in the vein of the type of character you want
Hmm.
to run, or something where you're working against yourself.
Right. Okay. Well, it does
Um,
seem pretty simple, but again, I got held up, or I've been held up in making my character.
it seems simple, but that's just because there's a lot to it. And like most old school books, they aren't the worst laid out books, but things are kind of laid out in different places, hopping around back and forth to kind of get the full gist of it the first time that you're learning it.
In these older books, the writing is dense,
It is. And I mean, um,
7 to 9 point font, as
yeah.
opposed to as
But
opposed
I
to
will think
Arial
unless
11 or
Yeah,
higher.
unless a lot of though what you'll miss is maybe a modifier here and there,
Mm,
and that's where in the end it's not the end of the world. Like if you forgot a +1 in combat on something in AD&D, you're not gonna miss it. In fact, a lot of people played for years without even knowing a specific rule, and just once they found it out, didn't even use it. And it's the same thing here. I mean, there's a rule that we recently discovered in getting ready for this play by post that
mhm.
I'm going to be honest, we never used, and it was a specific bonus to resistance rolls. And when it came up in one of the automated tools we were using to create the character, it took us a while to figure out where it was even come from. No one could find. And once it was in there, I definitely realized, oh, we never used that rule and
Mhm.
never even bothered us. So to get that extra bonus to our resistance roll, so which we'll go into resistance rolls later, but that's essentially for AD&D people, that's saving throw.
Okay. Wow.
So I'm going to touch on healing just a second since we're talking about death and things. Healing is slow in this game. Whether it be a critical result where you have a specific wound to your part of your body, and those wounds get very specific: broken bone, muscle damage, nerve damage, bleeding, uh, or it be just hits. They take a while to heal.
Mm.
And even in regards to the ways that you heal, those aren't fast either. First aid, which
So
is
there's no like battle healing.
there is, but it's even then it's not as fast as you think in many cases.
Mm.
Um, so a first aid, first the injuries are kind of classified in three different ways. In as a generalization, this isn't specific. You have light, medium, and severe injuries, and that's typically based on the number of hit points um, that you took for that injury, and or how much bleeding it is. When it comes to criticals, they'll tell you if it has a specific connotation. And based on the amount of that, first aid can only heal light injuries.
Yeah.
And really it only slows or halts it for the most part. You can reduce bleeding by a certain number of hits per round, and anything above that, it's really ineffective at. And once you're healed, you can't engage in any activity, as they say, with first aid after that that might strain the wounded area, or you lose all the benefits of the first aid just got you. All of the symptoms come back.
Mm.
And recovery from wounds takes a while. It's one of those things where it's slow. You have a chart that you can also use. Uh, Recovery of hits is usually at a rate of 1 hit per hour that you're resting. And if you're active, it drops to 1 hit every 3 hours. Now, other wounds, they can be healed magically or they can be healed naturally with some assistance from someone with first aid. And the recovery rates are very slow. There's a chart for that depending on the crit you
Yeah.
took,
So what
bone,
is slow?
burns.
What is like
So
so clearly not like, oh, we take a short rest and we get our hit dice back. It's which is depending on the style of the game we're playing in the modern game, you know, uh,
yeah,
10 minutes or an hour. Although some games make it a little more challenging where a short rest is 8 hours and long rest is longer than that. But so it's not like you just heal overnight. I guess that's what I'm
no, it
saying.
isn't. We're talking depending on how bad it is.
Mhm.
Um, and you can multiply it by a factor depending on if you're at rest or, at a special place of care. Um, but it's days. For example, head injury, you roll on the chart, and that can be, 2 to 10 days. And you multiply that by the severity. We talked about, medium and severe injuries. Let's say you rolled 5 days for a head injury to recover, but it's a medium one. You multiply that by five. That's 25 days. 10, it's 50 days for a severe injury
Okay.
that you rolled on the chart and got a moderately good success. And a lot of the spells, like I said, in combat, they can do things like stop bleeding. They can do things like, and I'm talking about the reasonably, not the super high level spells. They will remove stun from you, or they will allow you to ignore the effects of specific injuries. But a lot of the recovery and the healing of those are still slow. They're faster than 10 days, but it's not like you're healed instantly. I mean, some of them you recover at X number of rounds. Uh, so even those are not instantaneous. Maybe they're X number of minutes that you recover slowly. They just essentially healing. And this game is very heavy on herbs. Herbs are used for healing different maladies, including speeding the healing of bones or wounds. So it has that very fantasy feel where somebody makes a poultice and or
Yeah.
tea and applies it, and it just speeds the healing rather than laying hands on you and your wound magically disappears. There's one exception to that, which I'll go ahead and talk about now before we get into classes because it's unique to this game where there's a healing class where they instantly essentially take on your wounds. You're instantly healed. If you have a broken arm, their arm breaks
Oh, yeah.
and you're healed. And then all of their magic is about slowly healing themselves. So,
Oh, interesting. Well, okay. Yeah, I was looking at another game that is infamous for slow healing, but I don't think it's as unless you get an infection, you know, a grievous wound is like 12 to 30 days, depending on where it's
yeah.
located. So I guess that makes sense. Huh.
Yeah, and things can be sped up. Like I said, it's um
That's like the base, but then magic or other factors can speed it up. Like,
yeah, so I mean, when you get to um very high level, they can repair some pretty incredible things, but you have to get to high level spells before, like say, you have a broken bone. Your average spell of third level, it can mend simple fractures, but there's a 1 day recovery period.
yeah. Oh,
You
right.
get
So you
to
get that you're in the splint or whatever.
exactly, but
That
heals
takes,
a minor broken bone in a day, which is amazing, when not
yeah,
in the context of D&D or something type healing.
right.
The really high level spells, 20th level and above, you start to get into things where you can heal without that recovery period, but there's still typically a recovery period in a lot of cases of, you know, uh, there are some that are instant, but some of them are more like 10 minutes or fully functional in 10 minutes, that sort of thing. It highly depends on each one. But you have to get really high before you get that quote unquote near instantaneous healing, and it's on a per spell basis. Some say instantaneous recovery, and some will say within 10 minutes. So might be post combat. You're still going to suffer some effects.
Okay. Yeah, I think, I mean, I guess it would be fun. I don't know. It'd be fun to do some, like maybe build a character and then do some mock combats to see how that works.
Yeah, we can definitely do some examples of how that would roll.
Okay.
And that's probably let's get into the stats and skills and how that works.
Okay. So now we're going to talk
So
about the, like, an overview of all the stats and stuff.
Yeah, and I won't go into them in too much detail because, like you said, there are several stats. There are two different types of stats. There are developmental stats and primary stats.
Hmm.
The dev stats are constitution, agility, self-discipline, memory, and reasoning. The idea of these stats is they're kind of more innate stats. They're stats that determine how well you learn and develop. And these stats are used just like any of the other stats,
Hmm.
but they give you what are called developmental points
Okay.
based on what the stat is. Higher the stat, the more points you get.
Hmm.
And those are what you use when you create your character and when you level up. You spend those to develop your skills.
Okay. That's the development points.
Hmm.
Okay.
You use those to buy ranks in your skills.
Hmm.
And then you have a set of skills called the primary stats: strength, quickness, presence, um, which is control kind of over your own mind, intuition. They say kind of luck, precognition, ESP, empathy, which I think empathy is pretty obvious. Um, those last three, presence, intuition, empathy, are the stats that are used for magic,
Okay.
depending on if you're doing, um, just to put it in other games terms, if you're using wizard spells, psionics, or channeling from your deity,
Hmm. Okay.
which are the three types of primary magic in Rolemaster. Strength and quickness are the only two physical stats there, and they're the stats that you use a lot for things like combat. So if you look at the primary stats, those are the ones that affect a lot of the things that you do in combat for spell casting, attacking, dodging,
The ones at
that
the
sort of
top,
thing.
or
Yeah, those
quickness
the
is
one of
strength.
the yeah, they're the primary stats, and you don't get development points for these.
Okay. Hmm.
So to determine your stats, you roll D100,
Yeah.
get your set of stats, and distribute them to whichever stat you want. You get the freedom. It's not down the line. You get the freedom to put your stats where you want. And then one of the things that you have is each profession, which is essentially a character class, you have two primary stats. And when you set up your stats, you can swap any of your rolled stats that are placed into those two primary stats with a 90.
Wow.
So
Okay.
you'll see commonly people will put their lowest stats in those so they can get a 90 in each of them and bring all of their stats up a little bit across the board.
Okay. Hmm.
Now there are exceptions to that. Some people do like to take an especially high stat and put it in one of their primary stats if it's something that they really think is important to their character.
Okay. All right. And then you look on a chart for the development points, I guess, right? And
Hmm.
could you?
There's a chart for each stat. You take whatever you have in that stat, and it will give you a bonus, generalized bonus.
Mhm.
And most of those bonuses are going to be 0 to plus 10. You have to roll really high to get above that. And then you'll get a certain number of developmental points based on what that stat falls into.
Mhm.
This will also determine something called power points for the magic users, and spells are cast using power points. It's a point system to cast spells, and then you have to recover those points.
Okay.
The interesting thing about
Oh,
stats in this
that's
game,
cool. So it's not like Vancian. You just
no, not Vancian. You
okay.
spend power points to cast your spells.
Okay.
An interesting thing about the stats is you have what's called temporary stats and potential stats. What you just rolled on your dice
Hmm.
to allocate those stats are temporary stats. They're where your character starts, right at the beginning of creation. And then there's another table, surprise, called
Hmm.
the potential table. And so what you do is you roll another D100 for each of your stats, and you take what you rolled and cross-reference it with the temporary stat, what it is. Let's say you have a temporary stat of a 75. You would roll your D100, find 75 on the table, and then go down the table and cross-reference it with what you rolled, and it will give you another number. So for example, if you have a 75 in a stat and you rolled a 76 on your roll, that gets you a 91 on this table. That 91 now becomes what's called your potential stat.
Mhm.
And you note this on your sheet. Now, every time that you level up, now it can be done differently, I think, with some optional rules and things, but every time you level up, you roll on another table to see if your stat goes up. Your stat can go up to your potential, and it can never be increased past your potential. So as you advance your character, your stats may go up as well until you reach your potential.
Okay.
And the way it's kind of set up is the higher your initial stat, the more likely it is that your stat is already at its potential.
Okay.
Or either that or its
Or very
potential is not
close.
very much higher. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay. So you can increase your stats, I guess.
Yes, if you are not at your max.
Mhm.
Um, and then some other stats that are um, some can be kind of derived. You've got resistance rolls, which are essentially your saving throws, um, and those can be modified by a specific stat.
Okay.
Um, and then
Is that kind of like luck, or is it just like
no,
or how does saving
meaning
throws work? Is it like so? Is it like the five categories of saving throws, like a D&D first edition, is like swords and wizardry one stat, or hyperborea one stat that you roll on, or is it the three?
no, you have uh, on your resistance rolls, you
Mhm.
have a different bonus for each one.
Okay, how many are there?
There are a total of, I always forget off the top of my head, there are a total of six,
Okay.
six resistance rolls. And you just essentially get a bonus for them because the way that a resistance roll works, and we can talk about this later, but you make your roll, you add your bonuses, the various bonuses either from your stats. If you're a spellcaster, you get a bonus if it's in your native um, magical sphere,
Mhm.
and um, and then you cross-reference a resistance roll table.
Okay.
So the it's a little more complicated with magic and things because we'll get into that later, but it's kind of this, it's not what I would call an opposed roll, but depending on the spell and depending on how the caster casts, he can add negatives to your resistance roll. So there are also then hits, which are your hit points,
Yeah.
and those are derived by when you start by taking your constitution. I won't go into the formula but you run a formula against your constitution to get your base. And then this is an interesting one. Hit points don't go up, or hits don't go up every level. They only go up if you use development points to do so.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess it's a choice whether you want to increase your hit points or not, I
hmm
guess.
You can actually redirect away from that
Mhm.
towards another skill or something like that if you think it's more important.
Yeah. So it seems like a lot of like front end, right? So I guess the most complicated game, or the game that has it to me that has had the most complicated character creations, like some like champions, right? Like hero, where you got
hmm
all these points to allocate and they do different things. And
Yeah.
but this can
And
be, it's a lot of thought and process goes into it.
Yeah,
it
and
seems.
this is an interesting thing. I'll kind of because we'll transition a little here into race and skills, and this is the first one I'll talk about. Is there's a skill called body development,
Mhm.
and basically every rank of body development that you purchase, you get a hit die,
Okay.
and this is where race comes in. The races provide a couple different things, and I'll only talk about the most important things. I mean, to learn it first is that they give you bonuses to stats, and this is a really clear thing. Unlike D&D, where if you get a stat bonus from a race, it actually adds to your stat score. Your stat score does not go up. In fact, instead, on your character sheet, you have a different column for your stat bonus that is just race. So if a race gets a +5 to Constitution, you don't, and you rolled a 73 for Constitution, your Constitution does not become a 78. Instead, you get a bonus based on what having a 73 Constitution gets you as a stat. And then right next to that, you put a +5 bonus for the race, and then you total that across to get your total bonus. And it's the bonus that you add to your die roll. So it's a little bit different from what some other systems that are more traditional D&D type systems would do. So you get that. And it also, one of the other things you get from race is you get hit dice. And so remember, you add that body development skill. Each one purchases a hit dice as you develop that. Well, depending on your race, that's the hit die you get to roll for your hit points.
Okay.
Race also does some other things like languages. They give you some bonuses for your resistance rolls. And then there's also some stats on recovery time modifiers and how long it is before your soul leaves your body. They're
Yeah.
different
So
for every race.
are there like a standard races, species, whatever we're calling them today?
Yeah, in the
Um,
main book, there are several of them. There are a couple of different types of humans. There's your basic human, and then
mhm.
there's your kind of like high man, which is I don't remember the call off the top of my head, but it's essentially like if you're talking like Middle Earth, that would be like um the Dunedain, those
Dinadane.
guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And they get more stat bonuses. Um and the elves, there are several different types of elves,
Mhm.
halflings, that sort of thing. There's only about I don't remember off the top of my head, I think 8 in the main book, but like everything, there's Rolemaster companions that have tons of different races you can play.
Okay.
But it's not purely human centric. They're, your basic fantasy races out of the gate are right there. And there's a plus or minus for each of them because some of them, like the elves and the high man, or are going to get some really high stat bonuses out of the gate. But
Mhm.
I believe it's elves, for example, their soul leaves their body pretty quickly.
Okay.
Um, and the humans, if you're using, I think if you're using the optional background options, humans get bonus background options, things like that. So
Okay.
they kind of
That's
they kind
cool.
of try to
Balance it, I guess.
balance it a little bit. If you're playing some alternate game like MERP, it's questionable because in some of those settings, that the elves and some of those races are clearly superior. So
Well, yeah. Yeah. But I mean, I don't know. I've never minded that. Whatever. I
I've never
guess.
done the math on this on Rollmaster though to try to see if they're really balanced, but it's similar to a lot of old school games. Balance is not required type of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's an interesting concept, right? This idea of balance. I guess that's
Yeah.
what people want. I mean, but like some will make the comment. Yeah, someone would make the comment. Well, no one really plays race X the way it's supposed to be. They just do it for the stats. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Is that true? I don't know. But
And so a lot of people, I suppose. But that's the thing about Rollmaster is there are other benefits to races besides just the stat bonuses,
so there's
and some have a negative
flavor.
too.
There's flavor, I guess.
There's flavor, but also, I mean, each race has additional options. So it's, you are kind of in a position where the races are not just straight advantageous.
Okay.
So you could take a race for class, but you're going to run into some other the problems potentially. There's some negatives to the different races as well. So at least there are some balancing factors there.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I know I there's some games that I play that are pretty good about that. It's like, wow, this sounds really good. They can do this, but then they have a detriment here, and it's kind of built in to the system. It's not like a big joke in Champions. Oh, take those disads like dependency disads, and your GM. I guarantee you, your GM will never have like someone go attack Aunt May or something. But
Yeah, yeah.
so
And
I like disads that are built into the system, right? Um, that makes
yeah, and
sense.
and 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 there are, I mean, several right out of the bat. I mean, for example, the elves, they all get stat bonuses, but depending on the class you're running, they also get some hefty negatives to a couple of stats that may, they can run any class they want, but you may just choose not to do that just because it's going to impact your primary stat so much. They have against a lot of magic, the high men and elves all have negatives to their resistance rolls. While
Oh,
they get
against
bonus,
magic? Oh, interesting.
yeah, and they get bonuses, but they get bonuses to natural things like poison and disease. So
Yeah, I wonder. That's interesting. I never. It seems like it could be a thing, but I've never really. I've never looked at other games, and that's not is that really does that happen? Right? I'm not sure.
yeah, I don't
That's
know off the top of
interesting.
my head. It's not something I think about in D&D happening.
No, no, no.
Um, but it's and Rollmaster has orcs and trolls in the
Hmm.
basic in the basic options. I've never played either one of those, but I mean it's for its time. That's kind of interesting.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess you could play, um, or Kingdom or something.
Yeah, I mean there's definitely the options are there, and that's without even getting into the options books. All of
Okay.
the
Yeah. I'm gonna. Are you
so I was going to go into skills next.
okay? I guess I was gonna ask a divergent question.
Sure.
So is there like a setting, like a standard setting for Rollmaster, or what was the concept or
I can't
pitch?
speak to that. I know they published one.
Hmm.
They published a standard setting, but I never played in it. Um,
Okay.
I always played in house settings. But they do have a setting that they put out and kind of pushed, I think, starting around Rollmaster 2.
What were your house settings like? I mean, what
So
were they?
the biggest campaign I played in was it was definitely epic fantasy, but it was very gritty.
Mhm.
Um, the it was a long campaign. Took years to kind of level up, but it was very political intrigue. But it was high magic in that there were huge, well-known magic guilds, nation states at war. There were religious nation states that wielded powerful magics. The gods were real. Everyone knew the gods were real. Some people interacted with the gods at times.
Mhm.
There were fantasy races that were, throwing around magical effects. There were artifacts, floating castles, that sort of thing. So very high magic, and very epic fantasy, but also at the same time kind of gritty, political intrigue. And the game itself was deadly, so there was a lot of, deadliness, especially at the low to moderate levels.
Mhm. Cool. Yeah, but one of your players, I guess, one of the or the GM kind of came up with everything.
Yeah, yeah. And that GM also, one of the things they did when you get into anything that big is they had, one of those guys had reams of notebooks, like to keep all of his games in the same world so that it built
Oh
history.
wow. Okay.
And then if he had a new character concept, for example, my character was from a kingdom that he had created, people had heard about, but no one had ever played in. So it was kind of this mysterious, like
Hmm.
uh, almost feared because it was unknown type. And whenever my character started, we rolled up a character, he told me about it. He was discussing all the things that he had for it, and he took input on, well, what do you think they would probably? Because here's the rumors. What do you think they're probably doing? And took a lot of input.
Hmm.
But he also played it as if he played much of it, especially the further like I reached as a character to say, hey, I think they're doing this and they believe this, and this is how they interact with the world and the gods. The further I reached, the more he'd say, "Oh, sounds good." But as you then went through gameplay and discovered, a lot of that was maybe just that society's belief. And so there's always a gray area of, is that
Is
actually
that
true?
true, or is it, yeah,
Yeah, or
or
just what they
myth,
believe.
right? Interesting. Well, that's cool. Sorry,
Um,
I know I
yeah, not to
took you
say,
on a little tangent, but
yeah. So I'll get back to skills a little bit. When you use these development points to get skills, you buy ranks in the skill. And other than the special skills like body development, which is one we just talked about, that's the one that gets you hit dice.
yeah,
And it's a little bit different with spell ranks. We'll talk about that in a minute. Largely, what they do is for every skill rank you earn, you get a bonus
okay,
to your die roll. If you have 0, it's negative 25 across the board in general. So
hmm,
it's not just 0, you get negative 25 for an unskilled um, uh, rank.
okay,
Each skill rank goes up a different amount. 1 through 10, they go up by, +5 per rank. Then after that, it starts to reduce. So once you get above a certain level, you continue to buy ranks, but they become less and less effective as you go up.
okay.
I think after 10, it goes down to +2 per rank. After 20, it's to +1. And then after that, it's like a half a point or something once you get past 30.
Huh.
But if you get 30, you're already getting +80 to your rolls. So
Oh well,
things are
yeah,
already pretty good because success on a lot of things that are unchallenged is above a 100 or a 110, depending on what you're doing. So,
that's cool.
um, and in general, normally you can only get the default is you can only buy one skill rank per level in a skill.
Okay,
Um,
but I guess that's a curious thing. And maybe it's something to talk about here is there are levels and skills,
mhm.
right? So yeah, I mean, I guess a 3.5 does that you level up and you have a bunch of skills. But okay, never
And
mind.
let me talk about a little bit of how the concept of that how it works.
Yeah.
So each this is what people love or hate about the skill development system, I think, is it's very customizable.
Hmm.
So depending on what profession you choose, which a profession is just a class essentially, and then there are 19, 19, I think total. Um, you will get a different cost, a different cost per skill rank in each skill. So for a fighter, for example, body development and weapon skills and armor skills will be much cheaper than for a magic using type character. Whereas your fighter can still also learn magic. They
Yeah,
can
but it's
learn,
a lot harder, right?
yeah, everything's open, where the magic user will buy skill ranks much cheaper. And within that, and meaning cost and development points for each rank. Within that, there is some customization. You can specifically in the weapon skills, whenever you first start your character, there is um, there's a group of 6 weapon skills, and they're generic skill types,
Hmm.
things like thrown, pole arms, bows, two-handed, and you will get a set of costs, whether you're a fighter or you're a magic user type or um, a ranger, you will get, based on your class, 6 costs. And then when you create that character, you go through and assign them. You can assign them to any of those 6 weapon types so that you can prioritize as you go through your development, whether that character, if he's going to use one-handed slashing weapons primarily, you put the lowest cost there and you put a higher cost in, say, pole arms,
Hmm.
so that you can kind of prioritize in advance, how cheap it is for you to get good at what you want your character to use. And it's set from the beginning, and then afterwards, he can learn pole arms, but it's always going to be harder for him. He's never going to be as good. So you have some customization within that,
Okay. Hmm.
in addition to just the basic customization of choosing where you spend your development points.
Okay. Things to consider.
Yeah, and as I
Yeah.
said, you've got
Can you have a
generally,
wizard that wields a sword, or is that
oh yeah, oh yeah,
okay?
yeah. And you can have them who are skilled at wearing armor, but certain types of casters really can't cast and wear armor. The mentalist, they can't wear a helmet and use their ESP for lack of a better word.
Okay. Hmm.
The like I said, most skills you're going to use one. You're going to get one skill rank per level, but there are certain special ones where you can get more than one per level. And how it generally works is there's two different things you'll see on there. You'll see a number slash and another number.
Okay.
That means you can do two skill ranks per that level. The
Hmm.
first skill rank is at the cost on the left. The next one's at the cost on the right, and it's generally something like the first one costs you one, the second one costs you five. So
Okay.
it's still costly. The biggest exception to this is spell ranks, and for the spell casters, uh, they'll be able to buy as many as they want per level at that cost. So say it costs them two per rank, they can
Yeah.
buy five, six, as many points as they want per that level.
Hmm. Okay.
This is also how you gain spell lists of spells, and the main way this is done is depending on the type of caster you are, you're going to learn a section of the skill of a spell list. You'll learn the
Hmm.
whole section at once. So say it's the first 10 spells on the list,
Oh well.
and you
Okay.
you you spend your points to go towards that list. You can only do one list at once. Each one gives you that +5, and then what you do is each level, after you spent your points, you can make a roll to try to learn that spell list. You
Hmm.
roll your D100, you add your bonuses, and you add your it might be an optional roll, but we always added our um, class or excuse me, our our relevant stat bonus.
Yep.
And if you're over a uh, if you're over a 100, if you roll a 101 total or above, you've
Hmm.
learned that section of the spell list. And then your next level, you can start adding spell ranks, buying spell ranks to try and learn another list or
Hmm.
another section of the same list. But it's typically another list. If you miss your roll, that's it. And you have to
Yeah.
wait till next level to try to learn it. There's an optional rule where what you do is for every spell rank you spend, you
Hmm.
learn one level of the spell list. But
Okay.
um, that's a little bit different thing, and it's optional. The other thing I'll say is there's a special rule there. If you spend 20 points, you get the first spell on the list, and then you automatically learn the spell at the next level and can start spending points. So it's kind of a special rule.
Interesting. So, when you, I guess maybe are you gonna touch on this or get any skills? But so during the course of play, when it's time to, pick a lock or whatever,
Hmm.
can you keep going, or you can only try once,
Um, so you can
or is it just
definitely
dependent
keep
on
going.
the situation? Are there
Yeah.
consequences for trying to repeat a failure?
Yeah, so that's it depends. If you get a partial success
Hmm.
and it's not catastrophic, a lot of times people will let you attempt again later. If you get a straight failure, it could depend on the consequences of this failure on the table. It, you know, or a lot of people in the static maneuvers um, will say, "Hey, you failed." They won't let you try another one for a while. But that's in my experience GM dependent.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
So the last piece I would say that's interesting is during character development, you essentially have two levels that you do during character development. So
Hmm.
you go through two rounds of spending points and developing skills before you get to level
Yeah.
one.
Hmm.
And then the last thing that's interesting, although I've seen a lot of people not actually run it this way, you're supposed to allocate all of your development points at the beginning of the level, and then you don't actually get all of the results until you go up the next level. So say you spent points to get another rank in sword. Those points are spent at the beginning of the level, and then you would get the actual benefits of gaining that skill when you go up to the next level. Kind of like this is what you're working on as you progress this level. But I see a lot of people just have you spend the points when the level's over. I think the idea is that, they want to see role play that you're actually developing those skills and
Yeah.
things of that nature.
Okay.
So that's the real key. I think that takes you up through character development.
All right. So we gone creation through development. I guess
Mhm.
that development part is the first kind of when you create your character, you're doing that at the very beginning, right? And then that's how it continues as you level up.
Yeah, every
Yeah.
level then, it's just you get a new round of development points. You
Hmm.
spend them, you roll to see if you gain your spell levels. You roll your hit dice
Hmm.
and move on to the next adventure.
Okay. Well, cool. I think this is probably a good stopping point, and
Yeah.
maybe the next time we'll get into. I think there'll be a next time. It'd be good to kind of go through some examples of some of the skills and the skill roles, and maybe even uh, get around to working on a character or finishing up my character.
Yeah, sounds good. Like I said,
Cool. Well,
it's
that's good.
very front loaded.
Yeah,
So
front
there's a
loaded.
lot here.
That's true. That's true. That's good though. It gives me a good overview of Rolemaster. We didn't get into any of the sort of adjacent Rolemaster games, but we'll probably talk about that next time, um, and see how that goes. And yeah, so thanks so much, Darkfluid, for coming on and introducing me to Rolemaster. I took notes.
Yeah. It's it's a lot, I know, but hopefully I give you an overview at least some of the basic concepts up to this point.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated that you actually had your own like homebrew to set this up or to do this. I guess when looking up, I guess they had like the Shadowlands or whatever. Um, but maybe it'd be fun to like I just maybe to conclude. I saw this one video. I just got to figure out what game system. What if Gandalf accepted the One Ring?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's on. Maybe I'll link it in the show notes. It's on this it's called Nerds of the Ring or something like that, some channel. And it's like, what if Gandalf took the ring and what could have happened, right?
Yeah, yeah.
He kills a lot of people. That's a spoiler.
That's the spoiler.
Yeah, but it becomes like more of like I mean, I feel like Sauron, especially there in the we use some D&D terms in the last era of the War of the Ring was more, neutral to chaotic evil, right? Just
Yeah.
very like on his heels and trying everything and the cruelty and the anger that existed. Whereas a dark realm with Gandalf would be more lawful evil.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Lawful evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see
It'd still
that.
be evil, but it'd be in the guise of for the greater good, right?
Yeah. Well, Sauron was a lawful evil supposedly too, but
Yeah,
it's an
yeah.
interesting
But
thing.
but towards the end he just started, yeah, I don't think it, is when it was unraveling, it kind of,
Yeah.
became more to me more chaotic and out of control. I don't know. That's just me. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm sure people have an opinion.
I'm sure they'll let us know how wrong we
Yeah.
were.
Okay. All
All
right.
right,
But it'd
Carl.
be fun to have a game set in the Gandalf era.
Yep, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe Rollmaster. Maybe Merps. Maybe some other.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, cool. Thanks so much, Dark Fluid. And I will talk to you soon.
All right.